When Jordan Mechner single-handedly crafted a smash hit with Karateka, he decided to try and make lightning strike twice. Inspired by the 1001 Arabian Nights, he created a Middle Eastern adventure involving sword fights, wizardry, and a damsel in distress. Simple though it was, the groundbreaking animations and precise platforming of Prince of Persia made it an instant classic. Mechner would move on to other projects, but remained a creative advisor on the sequels, Prince of Persia 2 and Prince of Persia 3D. But while the second game was a great game in its own right, the Prince's first foray into 3 dimensions was an unmitigated disaster and made the IP an unwanted commodity. A series of corporate sell-offs and buyouts eventually brought the franchise to French publisher Ubisoft, who were making a big push to become a major label for the hardcore crowd. Nobody really expected them to do anything with a creaking franchise like Prince of Persia. But sometimes, a game that never should have been from a team with little experience somehow all comes together into a miracle of its medium. Because of the bizarre series of legal arrangements that have been made, sold, and bought, in 2001 Ubisoft had the rights to the name Prince of Persia, but the rights to the IP itself still belonged to franchise creator Jordan Mechner, which meant that only Ubisoft could legally make a Prince game, but they couldn't legally do it without Mechner's permission. That's the legal system for you. But Ubisoft wanted to try and make it work, because they really did believe that the franchise had a future. So they flew Mechner out to Paris for a meeting to see if he was interested. Mechner, after the disaster that had been Prince of Persia 3D, was hesitant to say the least. Worse, his last game, The Last Express, had been a critical darling but a commercial flop. Mechner thought that maybe his game-making days were behind him and it was time to leave it behind. That being said, Mechner didn't have a problem with somebody else having a crack at the series, but he wanted to meet with the team before he signed off on it. He did not want another Prince of Persia 3D. Any new game would have to have a crew behind it that was passionate, innovative, and talented. Ubisoft agreed to the request and set up a time for Mechner to fly to Montreal to meet with the company's new studio there. There was only one problem. Even the new game's producer didn't like the team. None of them seemed particularly inspired by the project. They saw it as more of an assignment that they would have to do. They also seemed to be lacking in the innovation department. So producer Yannis Malat knew that if the current team didn't impress him, they certainly weren't going to impress Mechner. So Malat did something very few producers ever do. He made a gutsy call. He replaced the whole team. Now all he had to do was get a whole new team, whip up some kind of demo, and impress Mechner when he came up in just a few weeks. The new creative director on the game was 27-year-old Patrice Désilets, whose biggest credit to date was the Disney game Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. But even in the limited time he had, he inspired his team to think about what the Prince could be in 3D, if he kept to the same spirit. With the same speed, fluidity, and acrobatics as the original, a hero in 3 dimensions could really be something special. With practically no time left, all they could manage before Mechner's arrival were a couple of quick, rough and dirty demos, featuring a basic character model running around untextured environments. That was all. And it blew Mechner's mind. The new team, whose average age was 22, had created something that recaptured the magic of the original Prince. They had perfectly translated the 2D adventure into a 3D environment. Even with the roughshod demos they'd produced, the team had, in Mechner's own words, quote, reawakened the joy of making video games. Cautious at first, Mechner was now thrilled to see the Prince come back to life. He signed off on the new game with his full blessing. Initially, work revolved around getting the Prince to feel as fluid and fun as possible. The character's movements were based on parkour, allowing for the hero to move around the environment with breathtaking ability. Level designs were built accordingly, and then fleshed out with superb artwork that reflected the fairy tale tone of the adventure. Combat was added in as well, bringing the Prince's acrobatics into the sword fighting itself. But there was still something missing. The game lacked a central innovation, an instantly recognizable mechanic that would make the game iconic. It came from a dying duck. When Désilets had worked on the Donald Duck game, he'd gotten really frustrated with dying all the time. He realized that it would be good cartoony fun if he could just rewind time instead of having to reload from a checkpoint. While the idea never did find its way into Goin' Quackers, he brought it up again for the new Prince of Persia game. There was a problem, however. The lead platform for the game was the PlayStation 2, which did not have a hard drive. The game would have to be able to remember all the players' movements and reverse it using only the onboard RAM. Could it be done? Astoundingly, the technical wizards working under Désilets made it not only work, but work smoothly.
Behind you!
It was a landmark accomplishment, the kind of breakthrough that pushes the very boundaries of what a console can physically achieve. And from a marketing perspective, it gave the game an instantly recognizable stamp. Just showing it was enough to wow potential buyers. And as the team pushed forward with it, they started adding in new time powers for players to unlock on their adventure. What wasn't good enough for a duck was more than fit for a prince. The gameplay necessity of having some kind of fuel for the ability even gave rise to the central story element of the game, the Sands of Time. Every development team is proud of their work, but there was really a sense that this crew was doing something special. The inexperienced novices working on a dead franchise had a jewel in the making, and Jordan Mechner knew it. He'd originally wanted to remain fairly hands-off in the game's production, even going so far as to sell away the IP rights to Ubisoft for good. But then, as the concept of the Sands of Time emerged, he started writing out the story. Then he started writing out the screenplay itself. Then he was directing voice actors in Los Angeles, and before long, he relocated to Montreal to work full-time as a lead designer on the game. That's how good it was. Mechner's story was his strongest writing to date. A tale of a spoiled prince, a captured princess, a scheming vizier, and the dreaded Sands of Time. It was every bit the grand adventure that Prince of Persia was always meant to be. Sharp dialogue, endearing characters, and strong emotional arcs rose the narrative a level beyond its competition. While never losing its lighthearted feel, it somehow came across as deeper and more involved than other fare on the market. It was so impressive, in fact, that it became a victim of its own success. An electric showing at E3 2003 convinced Ubisoft's executives that they had a hit on their hands, exactly what they needed to establish themselves as the new power player of the gaming world. A year before, they'd released Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, and earlier in 2003, they'd released Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six 3. If they could get one more top-quality game out the door that holiday season, they'd have proven their value. Trouble was, the guys weren't ready for a holiday release. They had scheduled themselves for early 2004. But Ubisoft was adamant that the game be ready for Christmas. The Montreal team went into an extended crunch period of long hours and late nights, desperately trying to do their own game justice. The nightmare scenario was that they would end up making an almost great game. If it was too buggy, players wouldn't care about the gameplay it was supposed to have. All they would remember was that it sucked. But working around the clock, the exhausted crew finally finished the title for a November release. Was it enough? Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time became an instant classic, a surprise return to glory for a franchise 15 years old. The slick graphics, stunning animations, and time-bending gameplay all combined into an adventure game unlike any other. It reinvented the genre the original Prince of Persia had invented in the first place. While the new game had completely different settings and characters from the old, it kept the same spirit. Reviews were uniformly glowing. If there was one fault, it was that the combat was simple and repetitive, but in no way ruined the overall experience. For whatever reason though, it just didn't sell the way Ubisoft had hoped. It only sold 2.4 million copies in a year, despite being on all platforms. It wasn't a flop by any means, but given the level of press attention it received, it was underwhelming. Ubisoft was fully committed to the franchise now, but they wanted it to sell better. The way forward seemed clear. The Prince needed to kick more ass. Tune in next time to see the Prince at his most prolific.
We're different. We're doing something important.
All they do, all fucking day,
kill zombies.
Here they come now. Do you have any words of advice for the people at home?
Don't just wait for a home. Fight.